Let's go Ravens. We're only a few hours away from free agency, and the atmosphere behind the scenes is hotter than you can imagine. I'll tell you all the details. But first, make sure you've already hit the like button if you agree that the Baltimore Ravens should keep Mark Andrews for next season. Dude, in my opinion, Mark Andrews should stay. He's a key player in taking us to the Super Bowl. If possible, comment like this: "Go Ravens! Let's go to the Super Bowl." Now, we need to talk about another very important subject, a move that has sparked a great deal of debate on the web in the last few hours. The decision has been made, and Brandon Stephens is out. The versatile defensive back, who spent his last few seasons with the Ravens, is taking his talents to the New York Jets on a 3-year, $36 million deal, with $23 million fully guaranteed. And so, Baltimore loses yet another defensive piece, one that has divided fans all season. Now let's talk about that, because for months there's been uncertainty. Would the Ravens move on? Would they see enough value in him to bring him back? John Harbaugh's comments just a few weeks ago made things even more confusing, suggesting the team might still have a place for him. He touted Stephens' versatility, talking about how he could play multiple positions and how the team valued that kind of flexibility. And then, boom, the Jets swoop in, make the deal, and suddenly another Raven is headed to New York. But here's the real question. Was this the right move for Baltimore? Because here's the thing. Stephens had flashes of greatness. 2 seasons ago, he looked like a rising star at cornerback, a player who could be a crucial part of the Ravens' secondary. He was physical, aggressive, never afraid to tackle. Whether it was a tight end, a running back, or a wide receiver, he was going to make his presence known. But last season, it was a different story. Something changed, and nobody could quite put a finger on what it was. Was it the coaching staff shakeup? The loss of defensive backs coach Dennard Wilson? The departure of defensive coordinator Mike McDonald? Whatever the reason, Stephens struggled. He wasn't getting burned, let's make that clear. He wasn't leaving receivers wide open or constantly being out of position. But he had one major flaw that became painfully obvious as the season went on: making plays on the ball. He was sticky in coverage, running stride for stride with receivers, but when the ball was in the air, he just couldn't turn his head around in time to make a play. It was frustrating to watch because you could see he was right there, so close, yet time and time again, he couldn't finish the play.
And that was the issue. The Ravens believed in him. They trusted him. They kept putting him out there, despite having options to replace him. They didn't bench him. They didn't reduce his snaps. They kept rolling with him, hoping he'd turn the corner. But it never happened. Even when the Ravens' defense started locking things down in the second half of the season, Stephens' individual struggles continued. And in the end, Baltimore had a decision to make: invest in the potential or move on. They chose the latter. Now, for the Jets, this move makes sense. They just lost DJ Reed and needed a cornerback to pair with Sauce Gardner. And you better believe opposing quarterbacks are going to test Stephens early and often. If he can finally put it all together, if he can fix that one glaring issue in his game, this could be a great signing for New York. But that's a big if. For the Ravens, the focus shifts to what's next. They have internal options to replace Stephens, but will they look outside the organization? There's a name that's been floating around in rumors, a name that fans are waiting to see if the Ravens will pull the trigger on. Will they? We'll have to wait and see. But here's what we know. Another Raven is heading to the Jets. It's becoming a trend. Year after year, we see Baltimore players making the move to New York. C.J. Mosley, Morgan Moses, Chuck Clark, and now Brandon Stephens. It keeps happening. And for Ravens fans, the question is always the same. Are these players finding more success elsewhere, or are the Ravens making the right call by letting them walk? Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Ravens should have kept Brandon Stephens? Do you believe he'll turn things around with the Jets? Or was this just a case of another player who showed flashes but never fully put it together? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them all. And let's be real, this isn't just about Brandon Stephens. This move represents a bigger discussion about how the Ravens handle their roster and the type of players they choose to invest in long term. Because this offseason, Baltimore has some serious decisions to make, especially in the secondary. With Stephens gone, who steps up? Do they believe in the guys they already have? Or is it time to bring in fresh talent? Fans have been throwing around names, hoping for a big splash. But historically, that's not the Ravens' way. They've always been about building through the draft, trusting their development system, and only making calculated moves in free agency. But here's where things get tricky. Baltimore is in a championship window right now. There's no time for a long-term rebuild, no room for trial and error experiments at key positions. If the Ravens truly want to capitalize on having Lamar Jackson, they need to make aggressive moves, especially on defense, where they just lost their top defensive mind in Mike Macdonald. And that's another layer to this discussion. Macdonald's departure could be part of why Stevens struggled last season. He was part of a defensive unit that thrived under Macdonald's schemes, and when Zach took over, there were adjustments. Some players handled them well, others didn't. Was Stevens just a victim of that transition, or were his struggles a sign of a deeper issue? Now, let's talk about the contract. 3 years, $36 million, $23 million guaranteed. That's serious money. That's not a prove-it deal. That's a team saying, we believe in you long-term. And for the Ravens, it's clear they didn't see him in that way. Maybe they would have brought him back at a lower number. Maybe they didn't even make an offer. Either way, they let another homegrown player walk. This is a pattern we've seen before. The Ravens are selective about who they pay, and defensive backs have always been a revolving door in Baltimore. They develop guys, let them leave in free agency, and then find the next man up. It's happened with guys like Jimmy Smith, Tavon Young, and even Marcus Peters. But can they keep getting away with this strategy? Because let's not forget, this team has Super Bowl aspirations. It's no longer about just making the playoffs or being competitive in the AFC. That's not enough. It's about winning the whole thing. And if the Ravens don't address their holes in free agency or the draft, this move could come back to haunt them. Now, for Stevens, this is a fresh start, a new system, a new coaching staff, a new challenge. And maybe that's exactly what he needs. Sometimes, players just need a change of scenery to unlock their full potential. And if he figures it out in New York, if he suddenly starts making plays on the ball and becomes a legit CB2 opposite Sauce Gardner, Ravens fans are going to be asking the same question they've asked before. Why didn't it work here? So, was this the right move? Did the Ravens make the smart call by letting him go? Or will this be another case of a player thriving after leaving Baltimore? Let me know what you think. Did the Ravens mess up? Should they have matched the offer? Or was this the right call? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it. And let's not ignore what this means for the Ravens defense moving forward. With Stevens out of the picture, Baltimore's depth at cornerback just took a hit. The team still has Marlon Humphrey, but let's be honest, he dealt with injuries last season and wasn't always his usual lockdown self. They also have younger guys like Jalen Armour-Davis and Q Blue Kelly, but neither has proven they can be relied on as a full-time starter. So, where does that leave the Ravens? This brings us to a bigger issue, the Ravens' tendency to gamble on their secondary depth. We've seen it before. They enter a season with what looks like enough talent on paper, only to have injuries expose a lack of depth at the worst possible time. Last year, they got lucky with the emergence of guys like Geno Stone stepping up when Marcus Williams was hurt. But can they keep relying on that? Or do they need to take a more aggressive approach this offseason? So, losing Brandon Stevens might not seem like a massive deal on the surface. But in the bigger picture, it raises some serious questions. Who replaces him? How do they strengthen the secondary? And are the Ravens making the right choices when it comes to who they keep and who they let go? One thing's for sure, Ravens fans will be watching closely. And now, I want to hear from you. Did the Ravens make the right decision by letting Stevens walk? Or will they regret this move when they're facing elite quarterbacks next season? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it.